During the period of adolescence, the brain is able to adapt and change and learn new things. During early childhood, what has already matured is the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that controls emotions.
Do teenagers think about consequences of their actions?
As an adolescent, they're motivated to go and explore the world.
As a parent, knowing that my teenagers are going to take risks in life, how do I keep them safe?
Being aware of that is the first thing. What teenagers and adolescents are also really susceptible to is pressure.
What are some of the main reasons for stress, anxiety, depression in them these days?
I don't believe every child should have therapy, no.
A boy teenage and a girl teenage, what's the difference between them?
Boys feel very deeply, and that emotions for boys are just as normal.
Welcome to Unbroken, my story with Tisha. This is where we talk about failures, challenges, and the lessons that shape us. We explore resilience, inner strength, and growth. Today, we are speaking with a therapist who works with teenagers, diving into the realities of teen mental health, communication struggles, and how parents can better support their children in today's fast-changing world. Let's get started. Louise, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was lovely to get your text message. Thank you so much, Tisha.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Louise Westley and I'm a Cognitive Behavioural and EMDR Psychotherapist. That means that I work with common mental health problems and work with people's thoughts, feelings and behaviours in order to help them to feel better. And I particularly specialise in trauma and adolescent mental health.
And today we're going to be talking about teenage brain.
Yes.
Their behaviours.
Teenagers.
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 Yes. So Louise, tell me, an adolescent's brain,
Yes.
it is forever changing, it's developing. How does that impact their daily living, their decision making and their emotions?
So in terms of the adolescent brain, it's probably helpful for me to talk about the biopsychosocial development. So the biological, the actual structure and the chemistry of the brain is changing. Also, there's the impact of puberty and the hormonal changes that are happening physically to the body. The social side involves obviously the changing environment around the young person and an increased social awareness, so an increased awareness of themselves as a social being and the influence of others socially as well. And psychologically, there's a change in cognitive development. They're able to think with more complexity rather. And we get this balancing between a rational mind and the emotional mind. So in terms of specific changes, during adolescence, it's a time of significant change. But what we say is that it's the transition from childhood to adulthood. So the brain is losing its old general structures that were needed for early childhood, and it's developing and forming new complex, more specialised ones. The brain also has a greater level of what we call neuroplasticity, which means that during the period of adolescence, the brain is able to adapt and change and learn new things more quickly. But also adolescents become more motivated for world exploration. So they become more motivated to go out into the world and explore. What happens as a result of this is we get an increase in behaviours that are more risk and reward driven. So in terms of how that can affect behaviour, so with an adolescent rather going out and being more motivated to go out into the world, we get more striving for independence. So suddenly you might see that your little child that would follow you around, be very compliant, suddenly wants to break down barriers, break down walls and go out into the world and explore for themselves. They might not necessarily want to take specific direction anymore. They might want to trial things for themselves.
But is that not wanting to take direction just from your immediate caregivers, or is it from anybody?
It can be from anybody. And to be fair, it's not to say that they don't want to take direction. That probably was a bit general of me to say that. It's more of their brain is motivating them to learn for themselves, to test things out for themselves, to try things out for themselves, to learn rather than just being told what to do or told that a certain thing might happen or might not happen. There's a greater motivation to actually go out and find that for themselves.
So teenagers can be very mature and responsible one day And then the next day, they might be making very irrational, impulsive choices. Why would that happen?
During early childhood, what has already matured is the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that controls emotions. So that's already fully mature in early childhood. But what's not fully online yet, what actually develops during adolescence, is the frontal lobe, which is the control centre of the brain, basically. So during adolescence, you have this imbalance of high emotions, high mature emotions, without the control centre to manage those emotions or those emotional impulses. That's actually what's being built as the adolescent is developing. So I use an analogy. It's like a car that's going 100 miles an hour, but you're creating the brakes as you're driving the car at 100 miles an hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So your emotional impulses when you're an adolescent are incredibly strong, and they're the things that maybe motivate you most. But your ability to think clearly or to make rational decisions, that bit of the brain is currently being developed. So you have this imbalance, which can affect, I suppose, behaviour, in terms of behaviour may be more emotionally driven. So as an adult, where you've got a fully developed frontal lobe, you can think rationally, you can make more complex decisions. You might look at what a teenager does and goes, well, I wouldn't do that. But what you're missing is actually that part of the brain for yourself as an adult is fully developed. So of course you can think about things differently. Of course you can maybe rationalise more, or bring in earlier experiences that you may have also learned from that the adolescent hasn't yet. So really, adolescence is like, it's an adult in training, basically. That's kind of a lovely way to think of it. It's an adult in training.
Do teenagers think about consequences of their action?
They have the ability to, but because of this drive for world exploration, this more impulsive drive, that might not be as automatic to a teenager at that point.
Do they risk assess?
Again, they're learning the capacity to, but it might not come automatically. That's a learned process. So if we think about learning, one of the ways that we learn is through trial and error. So with adolescents, that trial and error period is actually more motivated. They're more motivated to go and try things out for themselves and then learn from that themselves. So I suppose risk assessment wise, yes, they're developing the capacity to risk assess, but they might be more behavioural in their learning of that. So they might go and try things out in order to learn the risk attached.
So Louise, as a parent, knowing that my teenagers are going to take risks in life, how do I keep them safe?
So it's about providing a supportive, safe environment in which they can take those risks, really.
But what does that mean? 2 questions.
Go on.
A, how can I be a safe parent?
Right.
And how can I create that safe environment for them?
So we look at what we call safe risk taking, because as an adolescent, they're motivated to go and explore the world. They're motivated by wanting to gain reward that comes with risk. So in terms of what we can do as parents, being aware of that is the first thing, that actually our adolescents are going to want to maybe engage in more risky behaviours, or certainly what looks risky to us. To them it might not look risky. So providing a safe environment where openness is praised, where the young person feels safe to talk about some of the things that they might be doing or that they want to engage in, how we as parents react to that. So rather than maybe judging the decision or the risk that they've taken, exploring why they might have done that, or what led them to do that, what was the thinking behind it. So rather than just making a judgment of the behaviour, exploring it. What was the reason for that? Okay, so what did you learn from that? What might you do differently next time? Was that helpful? Was it unhelpful? what did it help with? Or actually, did it cause difficulties, or did it create distress? Okay, so what could we do differently next time? But it really is about the openness to those kinds of conversations, which sometimes as adults we can be uncomfortable with because it's our child.
I also feel that teenage adolescence is the time in their period when they also have to be working towards their career. This is quite critical in terms of making sure you're getting your education, you're passing those important exams, or whatever you want for your career to be. And then distraction can be huge at that point. So with social media, with your friends, or with whatever else that's going around them, how do I as a parent keep my judgment to myself and not I don't even understand how much to push them and how much pushing is too much pushing, if you know what I mean.
I do, completely.
How do I as a parent navigate that with a teenager?
So I suppose there's two sides to it really, Tisha. So if we think about kind of what's going on in the brain actually during adolescence, there's a process happening which is called pruning. Pruning is what prepares the brain for adulthood and independence. It's removing unnecessary structures that are no longer needed and strengthening pathways that are needed. We can almost liken it to almost like a sculptor sculpting a block into a refined image. What happens as part of this process though is what we call use it or lose it, where if the structures aren't being used, the brain will prune around those. So we're likely to lose structures that we're not using. So in terms of what you're talking about in terms of kind of career driven and looking at particular things that might set up that young person for the future, we do absolutely want to be encouraging healthy behaviours, healthy content, healthy things for our young people to engage in, because effectively the pruning process is likely to prune around those. However, what teenagers and adolescents are also really susceptible to is pressure. So actually we want to balance that with an understanding that the body and the brain during adolescence is going through so much already that fatigue is part of the problem, or certainly more prevalent in adolescence, because your body is going through so much physical change, physical, emotional, psychological change. So the ability to engage in things that we as adults might want our children to engage in, we might just have to maybe kind of rethink our expectations of that. So yes, on one hand we do want to be encouraging activities that are going to help their brain develop and help them develop as healthy, competent adults, but balancing that with understanding that it might not be helpful to be putting too much pressure on them as well, to let them maybe find their own interests, their own passions, absolutely. But we as adults, we can provide opportunities to finding those passions and support our young people in following those passions. But ultimately, I would say letting the adolescent guide that and having more autonomy and choices around that can create a really lovely, healthy balance.
Social media, screen time. It's just everywhere, isn't it? Even in schools, I think there is far too much use of gadgets and whatnot than there needs to be, but that's my personal opinion. What's your take on that? Especially if you look at countries like Australia, maybe they have banned social media for children under 16. Conversations are going on in the UK. I'm not sure where that's gonna lead and how soon, but what's your take on it?
I personally, from the perspective of a mental health practitioner, I would be in favour of it. Again, understanding what's going on in the brain, the pruning process, whatever your child is exposed to, the content that they're exposed to, their brain is pruning around that information. So it's really important to understand what information your child is actually accessing. But also, because of the social development during adolescence, there's actually a part of the brain which only comes online during adolescence. And it's the part of the brain that enables us to develop our social self. What that means is adolescents are incredibly aware, if not more aware at that point in life than any other stage in life, of what other people think about them. And it's all to do with this particular part of the brain that comes online during adolescence. This part of the brain isn't online during childhood, and it's a lot calmer during adulthood. But during adolescence, this part of the brain, which controls how we develop our social self, is heightened, which means that adolescents are very, very, very much more reliant on the information from others in how they develop their sense of self for themselves. So the comments from others, the opinions from others, the judgments, the critiques, also the compliments as well of others. But the information from others is so much more impactful in how they develop their sense of their own self. And that only happens during adolescence. So if you think about social media and the social noise, I'm going to call it, that they're exposed to, all of that, it's almost like being absorbed into how they see themselves and how they develop a sense of who they are. Who am I? What do I like? Where's my place in the world? Am I accepted by others? Do I belong? So we can see actually that not just from a social side, but actually from a brain development side, social media can have a huge impact on a person's view of their self, the world and other people, and how that then can influence their perception going forward.
So how do, as a parent, deal with the noise around?
As a parent and as a mental health practitioner, I think we struggle. I think this particular generation doesn't know any different. I think from certainly the Gen Z forward generations, their world is and has been social media exposed. I'm going to talk as a parent now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So me and my husband, rather I should say, didn't allow our daughter to have access to a phone until she was 14. She had access to a laptop, but she had no access to social media. That was first of all driven by, I suppose, my professional understanding and kind of what I'd seen in mental health services working with adolescents, and how social media was such a frequent either trigger for mental health distress or a maintenance factor in their mental health distress. With the internet, it's unfiltered information. And again, if you think about the brain and the development of the brain, an adolescent brain isn't necessarily able to differentiate between reality and unreality. And actually, having a basis of understanding the actual world and actual relationships first can give a kind of what we call in psychology a schema, can give you a template for or a reference point for what's normal, so to speak, or what's to be expected. Then once you've got that, once you've developed that from the real world, then you maybe have a greater ability to maybe control or sift through information in the virtual world, because you've already got a reference point from the real world for it. And for me, that made a lot of sense, because again, as adults, certainly as a millennial, being the last generation to understand life without the internet, we just had that. So we did just have experiences that weren't on social media, that weren't influenced by the internet. We weren't exposed to unfiltered reams of information. So we were able to create that schema for the world first and then go into the virtual world. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but certainly I would have much rather have understood the real world first and then had exposure to a virtual world.
But would that not also have an impact on kids, in the sense that, so they are not on social media, but their friends are, and the wider world around them is?
And this is what we found with, like I said, we didn't allow our daughter a phone until she was 14. It didn't stop there being significant difficulties because of vicarious exposure. So you're right, Tisha. Just because my child wasn't on social media didn't mean everybody else's kids weren't. So then when she was going to school and hearing that people had been talking about certain things, or she hadn't been included in something, or she hadn't been invited to something because she didn't have WhatsApp, she wasn't part of that particular Snapchat group or whatever, it caused significant problems. It did. And
what problems?
What I would probably see or term as mental health problems. So very high distress. If she'd been to school and maybe she found out she hadn't been invited to something, that sense of rejection, that they call it FOMO, fear of missing out, caused incredible distress. And of course, as a parent, you don't want to see your child going through that. It would have been very easy for us to just give her a phone. It doesn't change that actually her brain and every other adolescent brain isn't currently set up to deal with that kind of volume of information. Put that together with, again, how they're creating their sense of self from the opinions of others and from the views of others. Actually, it still was the safest thing to do to keep her away from it, even though we were having to deal with distress. I still think we did the right thing kind of long term. However, you're absolutely right that the peer pressure side of things and being the only one maybe not involved in certain conversations, that in itself also was a source of distress. So it's
Pick your evil.
kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, really.
Yeah, and it's about choosing the least worst option,
Absolutely.
I suppose, out of all the options that are there. So in your profession as well, Louise, obviously you come across so many teenagers. What are some of the main reasons for stress, anxiety, depression in them these days? And how would that compare to when we were teenagers?
In terms of brain development, it's actually kind of the same themes, really. So if we think about the social development of the brain, so we're more reliant on the opinions of others to develop our sense of self. So social anxiety is one of the main things I see in adolescents, really. So
Which is the same as it was.
Which was the same as when we were.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So social anxiety is the fear of negative evaluation from others. It's the fear of judgment from others. That was exactly the same when we were young. However, if you put the social media context onto that, we can see why actually there might be an increase, because there's just more exposure to the opinions and judgments of others. Body image, things like eating disorders, onset in adolescence, and that again, perception from others. In terms of body image, so I'm more aware of how they're seen by others physically as well, but also in terms of puberty and the physical changes in the body. So an adolescent is physically changing as well, so that may draw attention from the world around them. There wasn't that attention there before, or attention on themselves, kind of their own perception of self or their own awareness of their self. In terms of low mood and depression, again, because adolescence is that transition from childhood to adulthood, suddenly they're more aware of the world, their future, what this all means. And we can see how that can certainly have an impact on mood, especially again if I put the internet and social media context into that. If your adolescent is surrounded by messages and images of a bleak world or of a bleak future, what is that going to tell them about their self, their world, their future? So we can absolutely see how that can spiral into cycles of low mood and depression. General anxieties, worries for the future, because suddenly they're aware of their future self, pondering the future of adulthood. We can see how the development of the things that are going on in the brain, plus the context of unfiltered information to the world, can almost create a melting pot for an increase in mental health problems. So it's not to say that actually the mental health problems are any different to what we would have had. The brain is going through exactly the same transition, but we're in a very different world in terms of the amount of information that we're exposed to.
So in therapy,
Yeah.
have you seen any major changes in their behaviors after they go through this? What I'm trying to say is, should everybody get therapy? Should every child actually have a therapist for some time?
No, I don't believe every child should have therapy, no. I think therapy has its place. For therapy, certainly my therapy, CBT and EMDR, a person would come to therapy when there's a diagnosable mental health problem. Adolescence isn't a mental health problem, but mental health problems can come because of some of the things an adolescent is going through or exposed to. Does that make sense?
It does. But then I have a counter question.
Go on.
How do I, as a parent or somebody who's looking after, teenagers, how do we know that the upheaval that they're going through in their life is because of their natural falling down and bashing and reconstructing and peer pressure and everything else, rather than a crisis of sorts and that needs immediate medical, clinical intervention?
It's a lovely question. As a mental health practitioner, I would be looking at the frequency, intensity, duration and onset of the difficulties. How long have they been going on for? Is the intensity changing? Is it getting worse? When did it start? So at the onset. So I would be looking at those kinds of things from a clinical assessment perspective. But in terms of knowing the difference, it's very hard, because actually a lot of the things that an adolescent will display, because of that emotional maturity, they sometimes look like mental health problems. What I would say is if a parent is ever concerned about their child, to always contact a medical professional, whether that's the GP, for people in the UK, whether that's NHS 111, or to contact their local therapy services. So I would always advise that if a parent is concerned about their child, or if they just wanted some reassurance, certainly those services are always there for guidance. And I think schools have a part to play as well. I think a lot of this information is actually given through like PSHE lessons and pastoral care teams. This is why I don't think every child does need therapy. It's actually, there are a lot of services and support options out there before it reaches that point of diagnosable mental health problem. But I think it's hard for parents to know, is this a mental health crisis or is this a bad week?
Yeah, and I suppose at that point it is a good idea for parents to just assess the intensity, the frequency, the duration, those kind of things.
Yeah, or to certainly have that in mind.
Yeah.
And I would always ask the young person, do you want any additional support? Do you want to talk to somebody? Is there anything that you feel you need?
Would they be mature enough to understand those questions and then, again, be able to take the right decisions?
I think asking the question is always beneficial. In fact, one of the things that I say to parents as being the most helpful thing you can do throughout all of adolescence is to be curious and actively listen. Those are the two things that, certainly in my personal and professional experience, have been the two things which have seen the most helpful and consistent change. When an adult is curious without judgment, just curious, what's that about? Talk me through why you did that, or what was your thinking process behind that, or what were you feeling just before that happened? Being curious and actively listening.
And what does that mean?
So to actively listen is listening with intent. Not just listening while you're scrolling through your phone and going, we'll talk about it later. Or interrupting the young person, actually. Just having that, we actually call it therapeutic silence. So having that space to just sit with what somebody else is telling you. Just sitting with their experience. And not necessarily giving advice or making comment. Just actively listening, holding eye contact, being connected on a human level to that person. So putting the distractions down and just listening.
I suppose body language is also quite important at that time, isn't it?
Massively.
Yeah. I've got 2 questions. It is very well known that teenagers often don't want to communicate with parents. How do we encourage them at that point to have that conversation with us?
I'd go back to the 2 things I've just said, really. So being curious about why they might want to be spending so much time in their room, and actively listening if they choose to tell us. One of the things that comes up a lot when I'm talking to adolescents in my clinical practice is the lack of autonomy that an adolescent has. So that, again, I go back to, they're in this transition between childhood and adulthood, this transition from high dependence as a child to independence as an adult. So they're in this really weird limbo where they're wanting their own independence, their own space, their ability to do things and make choices, but they haven't fully yet developed the ability to do that and to make those choices. So I think the more opportunity we can give our young people to have autonomy over choices, I think that's only going to help the relationship between that child and that parent. So if your teenager is wanting to spend more time in their room, like I said, I'd just be curious about it. Just ask them openly. What's that about? What's in your room that's not downstairs? Is there something more enjoyable about your room? Because there might be.
Yeah.
But then that curiosity, first of all, sends a message to them that, that mum's interested in me. Mum's interested in what I'm doing, actually. So it sends a message of importance by us asking, do you want to spend that much time in your room? Is there anything else that you'd like to do instead? Or can we do something together? Would you be open to that? You're then collaborating with your child rather than telling your child what to do.
So my second question that stemmed from previously but also now again is, when you're actively listening,
yes,
and you're not judging, you're giving them that opportunity to express themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes their course of thinking might not be the safest thing, or their decision making might not be the right thing.
Okay.
How do you, as a parent, rather than it coming across as judging and correcting, and then them shutting down, how do you insert yourself at that point? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Oh, I totally do, absolutely. So one of the things that I'd probably say is what is right to one person isn't necessarily right to another. And again, we as the parents are looking through our adult brain, we're not in our adolescent brain. So what might be right to us as an adult, having experienced what we've experienced and knowing what we know, actually that might not be right for that adolescent at that point. So again, I would say it's about open communication, it's about curiosity, it's about exploring and understanding why they might want to make that decision, or what's their rationale behind that. Actually, what's their reasoning? Because actually they might give us some really good reasons that we as an adult might not have even thought about.
Yeah.
In a way, it's a bit like reverse mentoring, a little bit. We can learn from them just as much as they can learn from us, because they're seeing the world through fresh eyes, through new eyes.
Yes.
And there's something beautiful about that as well. That they're learning things and doing things and seeing things for the first time. Whereas actually we as an adult might have forgotten what it feels like to do that, or to have that experience.
Yes.
So again, I'd come back to openness, curiosity, and say supporting safe decisions, safe risk taking. And when I talk about safe risk taking, do you know what I mean by that?
No, please explain.
Okay, so safe risk taking is asking somebody out on a date. The risk is you could be rejected, and that could cause distress. But if you don't take that risk, you might not have the benefit of
other experiences.
Absolutely. Or going to the party. If you don't take the risk, you don't learn what happens at the party, or certain experiences that might have come from that. Whether that's positive or negative, actually they're still experiences for learning. what we can do as parents is give, I'm going to say, the basic understanding of what's legal, what's illegal, what's safe in terms of physical and emotional safety, what's unsafe, what's a healthy relationship, what that looks like, what an unhealthy relationship looks like. So we as an adult can give, I'm going to say, that foundational knowledge and information, but then supporting our adolescent to go out into the world and explore from a safe, secure base that they always know they can come back to.
Sure. Why do parents embarrass their teenagers all the time? We sing it's embarrassing, we don't sing it's embarrassing. Why? What is happening in their brain that our existence embarrasses them?
That's a really good question. I don't know if me as an adult is the right person to ask, actually.
Okay.
I think asking our daughters
Yeah.
would be a good start. I suppose if I was to think about it from a brain development perspective, and this might not be correct, I'm just hypothesising. I suppose that emotional part of the brain is mature, so emotions like disgust are very high. Their sense of social self is at its most high, so again, embarrassment, fear of judgment from others, they're very aware of. So I think maybe just a combination of heightened emotional state and heightened social awareness makes anything that could be judged just really awful.
Yeah.
So,
I think as a parent it's quite difficult not to take things sometimes quite personally, isn't it?
that's a lovely point. Because as adults and parents, we're still humans.
We're still humans, yes. When they're embarrassed by us, for example,
Yeah.
or you're walking eggshells almost
Yeah.
when they're with their friends and you're there, it's almost like,
What do I do? Do I say the right thing? Do I do the right am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, exactly. And also when they shun you maybe at times,
Yeah.
and make questionable choices as well,
Yeah.
because obviously they're learning and they want to experience things for themselves. So
Of
sometimes
course.
their choices are not that great, but you only learn by making mistakes, don't you?
Well, yes, but you also learn through feedback as well. So I think it's certainly okay for us as parents to give feedback.
Okay.
So-
do you want to explain a little bit?
Yeah.
Maybe give an example what
So
you mean.
if my daughter has done something which has upset me, I will let her know that has upset me. I won't do that in a confrontational way. I will do that in a self-regulated way. I will calm myself down first. I will think about, okay, so why has this upset me? And then I'll have a conversation with her, because actually it's helpful for them to have feedback about how their behaviours impact others as well. Humans don't live in isolation. We live in groups. We survive in societies. So our behaviours do have an impact on other people. But if other people never give that feedback, and I use the word feedback because I think feedback is a lovely word. It's not criticism. It's not saying you've done this wrong. It's just, this was how I felt about that. Can we have a talk? Can we chat about it? Okay, so these are maybe some points that I think I would like you to know. What are your thoughts about that? So feedback is a two-way process. But I think if we don't give that feedback, how will they know, how will they learn about consequences of their decisions or how their decisions might impact others?
Yeah. A boy teenage and a girl teenage, what's the
Yeah.
difference between them, and what should I be doing differently when I'm raising them?
The differences in the sexes is not an area of specialism for myself. What I would say is if we think about puberty, there are different impacts on boys and girls, physically and mentally. What I'm very interested in currently is the belonging of boys and their place in the world. I think it's a personal interest of mine at the moment, and the role models that are currently out there for young boys to be exposed to, and whether that's a helpful or an unhelpful influence. I think there's a lot to be said for us understanding that boys feel very deeply, and that emotions for boys are just as normal as they are for girls. They just might express them in different ways. But I've worked with a lot of young boys, particularly with depression. Some of the themes that come up are pressures, masculinity, who they are as a person, what their responsibilities are going to be in the future. I think it's really important for us to let young boys, or certainly adolescent boys, know that there's always support for them. they don't have to do this all on their own. There isn't an expectation that they need to be this particular person that they think they might need to be. There's always help, there's always support, and that they're not on their own.
Why have you found boys to be more, I don't know, pressured or have some of those more intense feelings than girls, perhaps?
I don't necessarily think it's more or less than girls. I think I might have just in my own kind of mental health practice just maybe had more exposure to boys.
Yeah.
But I think certainly with boys, I think, and again, this is only my opinion, that I don't have any kind of
course,
evidence base for this. It's just my insights and observations. But I think in terms of like masculinity, I think there's a particular pressure on boys to be a certain way, to do certain things, to have certain status. Whereas actually, I wonder where that comes from, where those messages, where those thoughts, where those expectations are actually coming from, and if they're coming from helpful or unhelpful places. I think about my own son. He's not quite adolescent yet, he's 9, but I would certainly want him to know that it's okay to cry, that actually it's very masculine to express your feelings and to have empathy for others. There's no expectation on him to be a sole breadwinner, that actually relationships are collaborative, and to respect whoever he chooses as a partner, to respect the value that that partner brings as well, not just feeling that he has to do everything or he has to be the one to be fully relied on, or that the pressure is on him.
I suppose your family dynamic will play a huge role in this as well, isn't it?
Lovely point.
Because both you and your partner have to have a similar thought process for your son to be able to, say, yes, what you're saying is correct, it's true, because I see that happening in this house as well.
Right.
So if you are saying something but they're seeing something else, then obviously that creates
conflict. Yeah, that's a really lovely point actually, Tisha, about parental alignment and alignment of messages. Yeah, because if you've got, and again, I probably come back to the internet on this as well, actually, that you might have one particular influence in the house, but actually you don't know what other influences there are that are also having an impact. So I think, again, this comes down to open communication, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Talking is so important with your kids, taking out, and I don't mean 5 minutes, I said taking out your evening out for the children when you all are back and sitting together around a table in the bed or anywhere else, and just having a chat.
Openness
so
and active
important.
listening. I would always, curiosity, active listening. I'd always come back to those things.
Is it ever too late to build your relationship with your teenager?
No, never.
Explain. Tell me more about this.
So there's a lovely process that we talk about a lot in psychology, particularly when we come down to relationships, about repair. It's never too late to repair in a relationship. And
Sorry, you don't mean just with teenagers, you mean at any age?
I mean any age and any relationship, as long as there's safety in those relationships. But repair is actually what strengthens relationships. So no, it's never too late to try and build a relationship with your teenager. If there have been ruptures, which there's going to be, because we're all individuals and we all come from our own experiences, our own opinions, our own values, there's always going to be ruptures. But how we navigate those ruptures not only can strengthen our relationship, but also I wonder what that teenager learns from that process of repair as well, for them, for the future.
What do you mean?
So an adolescent is an adult in training, so they're going to go on to have many other experiences and relationships. So if we can model what repair looks like, that actually we can have an argument, but we're fine afterwards. We can make up and we can discuss it afterwards, and we can carry on with our relationship. I wonder what then they learn from that for future experiences and for future relationships.
And their own children,
and their own children, absolutely, and the cycle further on and forever on. I think it's really important for us as adults and parents to model fallibility to our young people, that we mess up, we make mistakes, we get things wrong, We might do something that actually they might find disrespectful that we do, like we talked about the phones, and actually modelling the openness to them that they can give us that feedback as well. I think we as adults, with our fully developed frontal lobe, need to be the models really for the behaviours that we want our children to engage in.
So what are some of those things teenagers can do in today's day and age that will help them to have a healthy mental well-being?
So from a mental health perspective, we always look at what we call physical regulation first. So sleep is so important. And in fact, during adolescence, one of the things that happens is a significant impact on sleep. So whereas adults, we might release melatonin, which is the chemical in the brain that puts us to sleep, we might release melatonin about 9 o'clock at night, 9, 10 o'clock. So we get tired about that time. Whereas for adolescents, melatonin release can be delayed until like 1 o'clock in the morning. So quite often you might see your teen, your adolescent wanting to stay up late or just not being tired. It's actually part of the brain changes as well, so that can actually be really normal. The difficulty is that they still have school in the morning. So being aware of healthy sleep times, having a regular sleep time, regular waking time, even on weekends, can actually help with sleep regularity and sleep quality. So sleep is really, really important for brain development and for growth during adolescence, as well as for their ability to regulate their emotions. As I always say, we can't regulate our emotions if we're tired, hungry or thirsty. This is why I talk about physical regulation first. So sleep is an absolute priority. The other one is regular eating. So again, during adolescence, the body is going through immense change. That's taking a lot of calories. That's a lot of energy, because calories are energy. We need our adolescents to be fueling their bodies healthily through the day. So encouraging your child to eat regular meals, 3 meals a day, healthy snacks in between. And if you notice any changes to those, again, just having that curiosity of why those changes might be happening. So we've got sleep, regular eating and drinking water through the day. Hydration is so important. I think now energy drinks are banned for under 16s, I think it is. One of the best things I think that has ever happened. Energy drinks and high caffeinated drinks, very high sugar drinks, just create sugar spikes that then lead to sugar crashes afterwards and can again just mimic symptoms of low mood or anxiety. So I think physical regulation is the most important thing first. Sleep, regular eating, regular hydration. That gives us, and not just adolescents, but that gives us as humans a solid foundation for being able to function and for adequate brain functioning. Once those things are in place, then you can start looking at emotional regulation. So how to manage extremes in moods, how to manage when you're feeling low in mood, how to manage when you're feeling heightened anxiety. Do you have people you feel you can talk to, that you can open up to? Actively engaging in meaningful activity. In CBT, we look at what are called base activities. So having a mix of activities that nourish your body, which I've already kind of talked about, activities that give you a sense of achievement, connection and enjoyment. Those things are so important, and having a mix of those things is so important for mood, but also for meaning of life and for purpose in life. So I go back to physical regulation first, then we can look at managing like emotions, whether that's through having a mix of meaningful activity, or whether it's having ability to connect with others frequently, talk to others, socialise in a helpful way, healthy way, having access to opportunities, being able to experience things.
Are teenagers self-aware?
Yes.
Do they need any help in building that up any further at all?
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean?
So we're all self-aware in terms of from a certain point in child development, we develop a theory of mind, we are able to differentiate ourselves from other people. So we have an awareness of self as being independent from others. Adolescents become more socially aware. So they become more aware of themselves in relation to others. So yes, they are self-aware, but yes, they also need helpful support Because this information on how to navigate situations or relationships doesn't just come automatically. Again, in terms of open communication, being curious about what your adolescent is experiencing, actively listening to what they say and what their experience is, and then responding to that in a helpful way. That's probably the most useful thing to do. What I wouldn't want is for an adolescent to think there's something wrong with them, that they're defective in any way for feeling these things. So again, I just come back to having an openness with your adolescent, being curious and actively listening to their responses and to what they're asking them what they need.
You are a parent.
I am.
And you're also a professional working in the field of mental health.
Yes.
Has your mental health been affected?
It's a good question, this is already.
But has your mental health been affected raising a teenager?
I'm a human, Tisha. Yeah, it's really hard. This is just my opinion. I think it's probably harder because I'm a mental health professional, because I know what can contribute and maintain mental health problems. And sometimes I might be guilty of also triggering some of that distress in my adolescent and maintaining it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And no human is. It's not nice to think that you might have upset your child. If you're aware of your own self as a parent, it's going to make parenting a lot easier. If you're aware of your own stuff, if you're aware of what triggers you, you can then take responsibility for managing that or coping with that. The teenager doesn't necessarily have those skills yet, whereas us as an adult, we do have the capacity to do that. We do have a greater capacity to self-regulate. I think understanding your own self and your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own reactions, I think that can help you to moderate some of the things that might cause distress.
Are rules important for teenagers?
I think boundaries are important. I don't necessarily think rules and boundaries are the same thing. Boundaries open to flexibility and to change. And I think boundaries are very important because boundaries keep us safe. Us having boundaries models the safety of the young person having boundaries and expressing boundaries as well, which will only be beneficial for them later in life in terms of future relationships. Rules, I always think of rules as rules can be broken, and rules, particularly in adolescence, might want to be broken because they're the things that you shouldn't do. Whereas
boundaries can be crossed?
I think the difference with boundaries and rules is rules feel more black and white. So I would think of rules as like laws. That's how I'd think of rules. And I think society needs laws. It needs those kinds of rules. But I think within the grey area of particularly like human relationships, I think we need boundaries. And I think we need to model boundaries to each other to keep each other safe. So we know what is okay for somebody and what's not okay for somebody, and then we're able to respect that appropriately.
As a parent,
Yeah.
how do I know that I am doing okay and the teenager or the teenagers are doing okay?
We ask in terms of how that translates to parent-adolescent relationship. Ask for feedback. I'll be really honest. How am I doing? Is there anything that you're finding unhelpful? Is there anything that actually you really like about this, about what we're doing? Is there anything that you're not happy with? Is there anything that we can change? I don't know why adults sometimes are quite resistant to that, because again I go back to adolescence is the transition from childhood to adulthood. They are an adult in training, therefore really we should be starting to treat them certainly on a communication basis as like an adult. I don't necessarily want to liken it to a work relationship, but how would you communicate at work with a colleague? You would, if somebody's unhappy, you would ask them what's your experience of that? What would you change? What would you do differently? How can we work together to change that, or to make sure there's a different outcome? I don't really see why that should be different with a young person.
I think that would be quite unnatural for a lot of people to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder why.
Maybe because in your head they are children. They're your children. They're younger to you.
Yeah.
You are the one who sets the rules or the boundaries or the goals or whatever.
Yeah.
You're the one setting the expectation of what the behavior is going to be acceptable or not, or is and then when it's role reversal, you're almost treating them as equal.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's difficult for parents to do.
I think it is, because again, if you think about the role of a parent, it's to protect, it's to provide security. Certainly as helpful parenting, it's to guide, it's to teach, it's to help your child become the most competent version of themselves. And I think what comes with that is massive pressure that we put on ourselves as parents. Whereas actually, I go back to that reverse mentoring kind of theme. Actually, we can collaborate with them. We don't actually have to do everything ourselves.
We don't have to figure it out. Out on our own.
We don't. We absolutely don't. And actually, I don't know how helpful that is, because our adolescent is an individual themselves. What might have been right for us, or what we think might be right, might actually not be that helpful, or they might need a different route, or they might need adaptations for that. So I go back to collaboration will always create the most healthy relationship. And what you will see from that is reciprocal respect as well. If you're treating your adolescent in a respectful way, they will reciprocate.
I always ask for feedback from my children.
I love that. Tisha.
And I have also asked them to rate me out of 10. I'm like, how do you think I'm doing as your mum? Where do you think I can improve?
You get a PDA, yearly appraisal.
I do.
And what have you found from that though? Like as a parent, how have you found that?
I feel that I have been accepted more
Do you?
by the children, yes. So, for example, I will tell them that I never expect my children to say yes to everything I ask of them.
Okay.
I don't have that expectation, and they know that I don't have that expectation.
Yeah.
What I say is that if you think differently to how I'm thinking, convince me.
Okay.
Use your words.
Yeah.
Use your emotions.
Provide me a rationale.
And convince me.
Okay.
And 9 out of 10 times I get convinced.
Do you?
I do get convinced, because I think as long as it is safe, let them get on with it and let them experience that. And you're absolutely right. We have to give them the opportunity to express themselves without making them feel judged. It's very difficult to do, but I think it's important that we somehow navigate that. We somehow navigate that complexity to be able to do it in the best way that we can.
And that's just communication. We're never going to get it right all the time. We're humans, we're not supposed to, but that's feedback, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's us as the adult being willing to reflect and to say, do you know what, I'm really sorry. I think as an adult, certainly as a parent, I think sorry is also a really, really important word.
Lots of changes with how I deal with my kids, but the introspect had to happen from me, and the change had to start from me, otherwise we wouldn't be where we are today.
Thank you. That's such lovely honesty.
So before we end, Louise, I do ask all my guests to write a little positive something for myself or for their families or the wider world. So if you don't mind, can you write a little positive message?
There's 3 quotes that are my go-tos at different points. First one is, we grow through what we go through, which I just think is a lovely way of saying actually we learn, and actually there's growth in our experiences, whether those experiences are positive, negative, helpful, unhelpful. There's always something that we can learn from that experience. We will always grow through what we go through. So I'm going to write that one down. The other one is, nobody has all the answers. It's why we have each other. I love that quote. Because it's true. Not one human knows everything. We're not supposed to. But that's why we've got each other to lean on, to support us. And the last one is, enough is a decision. It's not an amount. So when something is enough for you, that's when you choose for that to be enough. It's a decision. It's not an amount.
Brilliant. I think you need to put all 3.
Thank you so much. That was so lovely. And
Thank you,
I just want to say thank you for putting this podcast together, Tisha. As I've written on there, being human is a shared experience. Thank you for giving us a voice.
Thank you so much, Louise. Such an important conversation. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Teenagers need space to communicate without judgment, and they need active listening from parents and caregivers. If you've enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you have a story to share and want to take part, please scan the QR code on the screen. Until next time, stay unbroken.